What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Nation here on the Outlaw Nation channel. I am the Outlaw John Rocha. Excited to be coming to you live here from the Outlaw Nation studios. We've rearranged a lot of things here in the studio. It's much more open, much more receptive when I walk through the door. I got a freestanding TV stand for the television so that I can create a little more room. Got rid of the entertainment center. Bought a couple of $25 bookcases from IKEA. I know from IKEA, $25. I didn't want to spend too much money, but they're real thin. They're like 9 inches wide in terms of for they come out from the wall, and about 30 inches or 20 inches, something like that wide. So I'm able to put I'm able to put books and records and all that stuff. So it's really created much more space. I bought a new recliner. I got a new recliner for Christmas. Got rid of the old one. Donated that one. And now there's a space for my walking pad, which I'll have to lay down and finally start doing to lose some weight on this fat butt of mine. And and all of this will eventually leave. We've bought a couple of shelves. We're going to try out a couple of shelves. I'm going to get some canvas movie posters, some classic canvas movie posters to put behind me. And if I ever get that Sony camera to work, the one I bought recently over Christmas, then I'll have a better shot of me overall. Because right now I'm just using, and I have been using for the last month, the camera that comes in the Apple digital display or Apple display monitor. And it's a pretty good camera for what it does. And with the lighting here, I think it works really nicely for what I do. But yes, I've got the vinyls up here on one shelf. I don't have too many records, but I have enough to fill almost an entire shelf here in terms of records. But the video games are down by the PS5. The movies are set up. You got Criterion, then 4K, then Blu-ray. Then I've got some graphic novels. I've got some regular novels. Then I got my Star Wars stuff here. I got my comic book stuff here. So it's set up in certain ways. Got the old Outlaw Nation Outlaw poster there from the old artwork, my Mandalorian poster. So all that stuff is all behind me is all going to change. We're going to try out shelves to get a much more cleaner look, trying to get more people to be interviewed here on the channel. I want to convey a more kind of professional look, but still honor the geekdom and the nerddom that I come from. So that's the point right now, or that's the look right now of the channel. And I like the energy and the vibe when I come in here. So, thank you to everyone who's joining me right off the bat. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you all. Seeing some old school people up in here like Calvin and Jeremy Miller. Thanks so much for hanging out with me here. I really appreciate it. Jay Scoots up in here as well. But today I was going through some things. I was working through some stuff. I spent about 4 hours preparing our conversation for Sideways. We're doing that on the Cinephiles. So I got up this morning about 7. Spent about 4 hours doing that. Then had some breakfast. Used the shower. Got ready. Watched a little bit of Liverpool this afternoon. But as I was doing that, I was also keeping tabs on some of these stories that have been running around the world of entertainment. And I've kind of made a resolution for myself to go live more often. I've always kind of waited for the Geek Buddies or waited for the hot mic or waited for whatever. And the truth is I need to start doing more content that is me doing it, me talking about it. And if 10 people watch or 100 or 1,000 people watch, great. But either way, I just want to get things off my chest and talk about stuff. And today, certainly the Neil Gaiman article that came out here, that's one that I'm absolutely going to be talking about, profiling a lot of the allegations that were lobbied against him that are very uncomfortable, hard to read, especially for those of us who've really enjoyed Neil Gaiman's work over the years, over the decades. Yet another man with a lot of unsavory stuff in his past, with quite a few people coming forward to talk about how terrible he was. We're also going to get into some Fede Alvarez news here, talking about giving us an update on Alien Romulus and what's going on with the sequel there, and Justin Baldoni stuff as well, going after Marvel and Disney for Nicepool. That's really actually happening in our world as we talk about what's going on in our world as well. And of course, I'm still on the high of the Commanders winning the game the other night in the playoffs, and we're heading off to Detroit Saturday night. Going to be a fun game. LA flying cross country to take on Philadelphia. That's going to be an incredible game. So we got 4 really fun games this weekend, I think, for the playoffs, and it's going to be a lot of fun. It's a shame we're already down to 4, but that's how things go, so it's going to be a lot of fun this weekend as well. But just want to remind you all before we jump into stuff, I'm only going to go 90 minutes today. So because I've got a meeting at 5 about some other stuff going on. So just want to remind you all the Streamlabs Super Chats are open. You see there right above my head, the Streamlabs address. It's also pinned in the chat in the description of the video as well. So please make sure you send in your support if you have questions, thoughts, or comments you want me to read, or you can send in super chats, which will pop up in the chat, and I will absolutely talk about them or address them as we go along. So let's jump into the first story, and its first story was the last thing I presented to you all, and that's, of course, Justin Baldoni and Nicepool. Apparently, it does not end with them. That's what Variety is reporting here. The fallout radius of the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni situation. Actually, I want to share this article so we read along together here. This is the situation as we go about it here. And let's take a look here as we look at this article here. The fallout radius of Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni's legal battle continues to spread, with Marvel president Kevin Feige, Disney CEO Bob Iger, and director Tim Miller becoming the latest industry figure swept up into the drama. Baldoni's lawyer on January 7th, Brian Friedman, sent a hold letter to Feige and Iger in connection with his client's anticipated claims against Ryan Reynolds, Lively, and other unnamed parties. Variety has viewed a copy of the letter, which calls on the studio to preserve all relevant documents and data with regards to Baldoni. And Tatiana Siegel is writing this one, a favorite of ours on the Hot Mic. The move may come as a surprise, given that it ends with us. The film at the center of the Lively and Baldoni rift was released by Sony and had nothing to do with Disney. But Baldoni's attorney believes that Lively's husband, Ryan Reynolds, was flagrantly mocking Baldoni in a sequence in Marvel's Deadpool and Wolverine, which was released by Disney in July. The sequence features Reynolds playing Nicepool, as you guys know who've seen it. I had a picture up there just a second ago. An oafish alternate version of the eponymous, sorry, I have trouble with that word all the time, hero, Deadpool, saying such lines as, "Where in God's name is the intimacy coordinator?" and complimenting Ladypool for snapping back into shape after giving birth. Look, given the allegations that have been lobbied by both Justin and Blake, you start to see how maybe Ryan was being a petty little bitch and putting this stuff in his movie. Lively, who cameoed in the tentpole as Ladypool, recently accused Baldoni of sexually harassing and fat-shaming her postpartum body on the set of It Ends With Us. When Deadpool points out Nicepool's misogyny in the scene, the latter replies, "It's okay, I identify as a feminist." During the development, production, and marketing of It Ends With Us, a drama about domestic violence, Baldoni often touted his credentials as a feminist and ally to women. Marvel and Disney have declined to comment, as did an attorney for Reynolds and Lively. Friedman cannot be reached for comment. He is believed to be one of the many industry figures whose home was sadly destroyed in the Pacific Palisades fire that is still raging. The litigation hold letter sent the day that the fires began calls for Marvel and Disney to preserve, quote, "any and all documents relating to the development of the Nicepool character, as well as communications relating to the development, writing, and filming of storylines and scenes featuring Nicepool." The letter also calls for the studio to, quote, "retain any and all documents relating to or reflecting a deliberate attempt to mock, harass, ridicule, intimidate, or bully Baldoni through the character of Nicepool." Reynolds, who was a writer, producer, and star of Deadpool and Wolverine, has never addressed if there's a connection between Nicepool and Baldoni, even as fans speculated about just that long before the current legal clash between the parties that has spawned the 3 lawsuits to date. On December 31st, Baldoni and others sued, of course, the New York Times for $250 million. We know all about that. The group accused the Times of cherry-picking communications and what have you. During an appearance on the Megyn Kelly show, Friedman referenced the Nicepool character. There's no question it relates to Justin. I mean, anybody that watched that hair bun. He also questioned why Reynolds would use his wife's alleged sexual harassment for comedic fodder. If somebody is seriously sexually harassed, you don't make fun of it. It's a serious issue. The litigation hold letter, which was written, had, of course, anticipated claims relate to Reynolds and Lively's torturous interference with contract and civil extortion. Let's see here. It goes well beyond the Nicepool character and implies that Lively Baldoni style rift exists between Reynolds and Miller, who directed the first Deadpool movie but did not return for the sequel or Deadpool and Wolverine, and the director and star are known to have clashed for sure. The letter instructs the studio to preserve any documents and data related to complaints made against Ryan Reynolds by any person, including without limitation Tim Miller and Miller's departure from the film Deadpool 2, as well as any instances of Reynolds exerting creative control of any film project. Now, this is fascinating, all right? This is such an interesting situation because now we got ourselves some juiciness, right? This is a very, very, as what's his face said in Reservoir Dogs, what's the cut, Papa? Juicy, Junior. Real juicy. This is juicy because not only are they being a little petty by being like, you know what? I want you to surrender any and all documents or retain any and all documents and communications or whatever about how Nicepool was created, they're also going one step further and going, we need Marvel and Disney to not erase any interactions or reports they have of Reynolds clashing with anybody. Ryan Reynolds. So he's not only just going after Blake now, he's going after Ryan now. So this is going to be real fascinating to see where it ends up, because honestly, when you look at the situation and the way it's gone down here, I think they thought they were Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds. If you don't believe Blake Lively's allegations, and I certainly have some questions about them, I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I've got my questions about it. That's where I'm at right now on it. Then you got to look at it this way for his side, that he feels as a smaller creator, he is being bullied by these two kaijus, in essence, in the entertainment industry. They're essentially a Godzilla and King Kong going after a small version of one of those titans there that we've seen in those movies, because they were trying to crush him and embarrass him. They used the sexual harassment situation to go against him. And of course, Jeff and I had heard that it was from sources on the set that it was Blake who had kind of set him up in ways. So certainly it's a he said, she said situation. Only the people who were probably there in those rooms know exactly what happened. And I hope, if you're going to find out the truth, I hope this extends out to all her assistants, to all the people involved who are with him and her, to surrender all their communications to find out what's going on, And I'm a big fan of like revealing. Transparency is huge. So let's see what you got. Let's see what happened here. Let's see what the truth is. Let's see what the back and forth was. And bringing in Tim Miller, I think, is real interesting, because Tim Miller clearly, Ryan Reynolds had issues with Tim Miller. He's probably jealous that Tim Miller had got all the attention for Deadpool when Ryan wanted the attention for himself, because I do believe this. I think Ryan is a raging egomaniac. And look, that's how you survive. That's how you become successful for some people in Hollywood. So no disrespect. He's made himself $1 billion. Clearly, he's got an approach to it. But I think him and Blake are starting to come off as the quarterback and the high school prom queen. It kind of feels that way, that they're like the kid throwing up the collars and being the arrogant people that you see in high schools that bully other people from like back in the 80s. You kind of have that energy or that sense of the situation. I mean, but that being said, if what Blake Lively accuses Justin Baldoni happened on the set did happen on the set, that is horrible. And that should have never happened. And that should absolutely have been shut down. And more people should have been shut down and stopped from this happening, right? There should have been much more going on here to stop this from happening. But now, if the Nicepool situation, if this is actually true, and certainly you can make a very strong case that Ryan was absolutely intending to embarrass Justin with what he was doing here. So that tells you how far back this situation goes, that they were able to put a character like this in Deadpool and Wolverine, a film that came out before It Ends With Us came out, which is really shocking. Well, I guess they came out around the same time, a couple weeks of difference, but still technically before It Ends With Us came out. It's an interesting situation that he would do that. And there is a level of disconnect in terms of why would you make fun of this man in this way if you really felt that he had assaulted or violated your wife's privacy in this way? Why would you go, unless it's a petty type of, like they have a petty type of angry type of humor that they like to, prod you or use the biggest canvas possible, a Marvel movie, to go after him and send him a notice. It's super petty. Like, it is super petty to do that. So I wonder if that's the situation of what went down with Nicepool, because it really does feel like there are elements of Nicepool that really connect in a linear way or a straight line to Justin Baldoni. So if he has done this, it could get real ugly real fast. If Tim Miller's communications are brought in, it could get real ugly real fast. And from what I've heard from a number of sources I have, that Ryan has had run-ins with quite a few people over the years about the editing of his films, about the promotion of his films, about the marketing of his movies, about who's involved, who's not involved. They've had verbal battles with people behind the scenes. And look, it's Hollywood. People fight all the time. People, get into stuff all the time because they want the product to come out as best they can. And certainly Ryan can make that defense. If I ever got into it with anybody, it was because I wanted my film or my project to come out the best that it could come out. And, you can totally understand that and respect that. But that's an interesting situation to have going down here. And I wonder if they're actually going to retain all this stuff. I wonder what Disney and Marvel, like at some point, it becomes a law of diminishing returns for Marvel and Disney in terms of the PR hit they're going to take. And they instead go like, look, y'all got to settle this shit. Like they go to Ryan and Blake and say, listen, we stood behind you guys. We stood beside you guys. WME comes out and goes, we got rid of the dude like you wanted us to, even though they claimed there was no, please. We did everything you did, but now we're getting to the point where it's becoming, we are now getting dragged into this because we have nothing to do with it ends with us, but we are dragged into this because we allowed you to do this on a Marvel movie, and we have way deeper pockets than anybody who funded it ends with us, and we wouldn't like to get involved in this. So it becomes a PR hit, which is the last thing Marvel and Disney want right now. So I think they're going to encourage them to settle. I think 100% they're going to go to Justin. They're going to go to Blake, and they're going to listen. Enough is enough already. We need y'all to settle this shit once and for all and put it to bed. And maybe Justin comes out with a statement himself and says, look, if I did anything on the set that was inappropriate, I completely apologize. It was not my intention, but I can see how it was taken that way. So you kind of brand safe for himself. And then on the other side, Ryan and Blake can come out and say, we were vindicated. We've settled this situation, and we're fighting for safer sets in Hollywood. So both can come out looking kind of good in the way they settle it, but they need to settle it, for God's sakes, because I mean this is getting crazy on so many levels here with what's going down between them, and it's escalating. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays itself out. Thank you, the people sending in super chats. Dennis Hoffman saying Neil Gaiman news makes me feel gross. Got copies of his recent Miracle Man series. I know we're going to get to Neil in just a few minutes here. We're going to definitely take about 45 minutes to break down that whole article and more. Carver Tate saying, John, if you create an Amazon wish list like Christian did for the studio, I know that I and probably a lot of others would be happy to contribute. Oh, that's very kind, Carver. You know what? That's not a bad idea. I'm just used to paying for my own stuff, but that would be nice. Let me see what I can do, man. Let me look through it and let me see what might be available for me to update the studio. And maybe some movie posters. I like them to be canvas, so maybe I can find some that you all might be able to do. Well, I appreciate that. Thanks very much, Carver. It's super, super kind of you, brother. Super kind of you. Well, I appreciate it. So we will see. And at the end of the day, what happens with that? Yeah, it's been childish. I know Brooklyn's saying that. I agree with you, Brooklyn, completely. It's been childish from top to bottom. And Jay Scoot says, I think Baldoni and his legal team are angling for us to sell out of court hush money by bringing Ryan Disney. Yes, I agree. I agree 100%. They are trying to get to the point where even Disney and Marvel are like, look, let's just settle the shit, pay him what he wants, and let's get on the F out of here. Because I think that's what they want to do. But I do believe that at some point, the It Ends With Us franchise, Justin is going to have to surrender that. And I think whatever is the settlement here is Justin is either going to have to surrender it and be compensated for it, or he gets to keep it and maybe waits a year or two before he does another one so that it kind of washes away the Baldoni drama. Although Colleen Hoover has come out in support of Blake Lively, and it would be tough to sell your movie with the author of the film having issues with you and having sided against you in this situation. So it's going to be interesting to see what the course that Baldoni takes. But I think he absolutely wants to push as far as he can push on this. He's got a very good lawyer here, and Mr. Friedman, who is going to absolutely try to get as much as he can for his client. And then by the end, they're going to settle for a good amount that makes Baldoni feel good. And then Blake and Ryan will move on. They'll probably move on with that franchise, and Blake can champion that franchise and she can have her situation. So we'll see what happens with that. All right, let's move on to oh wait, I gotta make sure that we don't have any Streamlabs coming through, just in case people are sending in Streamlabs, which you see there above my head. It's also pinned in the chat description of the video, I think, as well. If people want to send in support for the channel here as we go along. And of course, we also have the Patreon. Patreon's still going strong, hanging out. We hung out during the Commanders game on Sunday night for almost 2 hours before I finally had to get off so I could watch the game without them telling me what was happening, because they were 10 seconds ahead. So even within the NFL playoffs of my team, I still make time for my patrons. So, all right, let's move on to this other story here. Let's see what we got. Yeah, that's Fede Alvarez. Let's talk about it here. Fede Alvarez With the box office success of Alien Romulus last year, it's given the franchise a fresh dose of new life here. And Fede Alvarez was speaking to Empire Online this week, and he provided an update on Alien Romulus 2. He said, Rodo Saigas and I are working on that right now. We're excited about where it can go. We've almost checked all of the boxes of things that I want to see in Romulus and brought back a lot of the things I hadn't seen in a while. Wherever we go now, we can go into uncharted waters. He also said, I think it'll be exciting, so exciting to go with characters you know from this movie. So clearly, hopefully, we'll be seeing Kaylee Spaney and David Johnson coming back here to a place in the Alien franchise that we've never seen before, and to discover things that you've never seen before. The mistake usually with sequels is to make them because you can, and because of the success of Romulus, we definitely can make a sequel, but I wouldn't do it unless we have a really good idea for it, something that's worthy of the title. So it sounds like the sequel isn't 100% guaranteed, but he is trying to make it happen as much as possible. And of course, Disney's going to bring the Alien Earth series to FX and Hulu later on this year in the summer. So we're not done with Alien in any way, shape, or form. So I like this. I like the comments here from Fede Alvarez. I loved Alien Romulus. That was a lot of fun. David Johnson is an actor I had not seen in anything before. And of course, he'd been in stuff before. I just hadn't seen it, like Industry. And watching him here, I thought he was a revelation. I'm kind of in the camp that he could be an interesting Black Panther if you were to go that route, although he's like, I think 3 inches shorter than Chadwick was, but could be interesting because he's a really strong actor. Could be fun to see him. And Kaylee Spaney, I think I really enjoyed in so many things recently, including Alien Romulus, but also Priscilla. And what else was she in? She was in something else recently that I got. Oh, yeah, Civil War. I thought she was great in Civil War. So, yeah, so having them come back and then having Fede Alvarez going, look, now we get to expand the world that we presented in the first movie. Now we get to go to places that we didn't go before. So that is really interesting. Where are they going to go? What are they going to see? What are they going to reveal? Is there stuff within the Alien lore that a lot of us have really wanted to see in Alien? And now we're going to get it in this Alien movie. We shall see. Certainly with Transformers, what did we say? We really want a film on Cybertron. Well, we finally got one in Transformers 1. Yeah, it's animated, but, one step at a time. It was a pretty cool film, Transformers 1, seeing it on Cybertron, getting a chance to be on that planet, see the varying levels, the hierarchy within Cybertron. That was awesome. So the idea that we can see more of the alien mythology and canon that we haven't seen yet, but has been profiled in books and stories, in these encyclopedias, in Ridley talking about the world of Alien, I think this could be a lot of fun. And I love Fede as a director, and so I'm even more excited to see what he's going to do with a sequel to something like this, Alien Romulus, and what more he can bring out of that. So that'll be fun for sure. All right, let's hit a couple more of these Streamlabs, or Super Chats rather, before we jump into this Neil Gaiman story. Wiley OFC says, John, I love these streams. It would be great to cut some segments and post it for shorter content. I think it would be great. Wiley, I've always told you, if you're up for it, I would love you to do it. I'm always so busy. It's tough to sit down and rewatch an hour-and-a-half show and clip out certain segments. So if you feel like there's something you can clip out, like a minute or whatever, if you want to clip it out, send it to me. I'll run it through my shorts program and I'll put it up, brother. I appreciate you madly, and thanks so much for being supportive. Always good to see you, brother. I hope you're feeling better about things as well. Carver Tate says, hell yeah, John. I've been watching you for about 10 years, and recently you've been a lifesaver as I recover from ACL surgery. So happy to help. Oh, thanks, Carver. And I'm glad you're recovering, brother. I'm sorry you tore that, or you injured that ACL. Those things aren't easy to recover. They take a lot of time. The fact that you allowed me and any of my content that I'm a part of to entertain you as you recover is an honor on my end, brother, and a blessing. So thank you very much, Carver. And yeah, I appreciate you suggesting the Amazon wish list. I will absolutely put that on the table. So thank you. Let's see if we got any Streamlabs. Okay, no Streamlabs yet. So let's keep going. Let me take a drink here. Okay. All right. So here we go. Let's get into the meat of things. Oh, Murder Rata says that Alien Romulus hits Disney Plus over here tomorrow. Great. Enjoy. I hope you like it, man. I hope you like it. It'd be a lot of fun. All right, let's get into this story. This is a rough story, so strap in. There's going to be some, I'm warning you now, there's some uncomfortable comments. There's some uncomfortable situations in this story. I'm warning you now ahead of time. I'm going to try to censor where I can censor, but still intimate what is being referred to in the article. And we're going to read the article together. That's what we're doing. I like to break down articles and take them step by step, especially when they're well written like this one is, and break it down. So strap in, settle in, and trust that this voice, these golden tubes, will take you in a good place. I mean, I could even go into this place if you want me to as I deliver this conversation. No, I don't want to go there. But like, we're going to get into it. So sit back, relax. Let's go through this. And as I said, I want to be done with this in about an hour and 5 minutes of the show. So I want to go through everything and make sure we are on the same page and reading the same article. So we're reacting to things. So I'm going to share the screen here with this article. This is it is from New York. It is in New York Magazine, but through Vulture here. This one is written by Lila Shapiro. There is no safe word. How the best-selling fantasy author Neil Gaiman hid the darkest parts of himself for decades, right? And we're going to read the article, and then we're going to tell you what he has said recently or how he responded to the article recently. I want to make sure it's big enough so everybody can read it. All right, good. So let's start it here. Let's move it. Okay. Let me see. Can you guys read it with me? All right, good. Scarlett Pavlovich was a 22-year-old drama student when she met the performer Amanda Palmer by chance on the streets of Auckland, that's New Zealand. It was a gray, drizzly afternoon in June of 2020, and Palmer, then 44, was walking down the street with the actress Lucy Lawless, one of the most famous people in New Zealand, owing to her 6-season stint portraying Xena the Warrior Princess. And of course, if you have seen Lucy Lawless lately, she's in an awesome new series called My Life is Murder that's been going on for a couple of seasons now, or 3 seasons. But Pavlovich noticed only Palmer. She'd watched her TED Talk, The Art of Asking, and was fascinated by the cult famous feminist writer and musician, by her unabashed self-assurance. So immediately we're presented with this young woman, Scarlett Pavlovich, and she is enamored by Amanda Palmer because Amanda Palmer exudes this kind of self-assurance of herself. On the surface, Pavlovich appeared to be self-assured as well, a local girl. She had dropped out of high school at 15 to travel to Europe, Morocco, and the Middle East on the cheap, pausing in Scotland, where Tilda Swinton, of all people, gave her a scholarship to attend her Steiner School Drumgeon. I hope I'm saying that right. I know Scottish is all different. Drumdoon, maybe. And London to work in the cabaret scene. So she was interested in cabaret stuff. Eventually, her visa expired and she ran out of money. And so in 2019, she returned to Auckland, where she enrolled in an acting school and took a job at a perfumery. Pale and dark-haired and waifish, she favored bold colors and outrageous outfits. On the day she met Palmer, on most days then, she'd painted a triangle of translucent silver beneath her lower lashes, so it looked as though she'd been crying tears of glitter. So clearly, a woman with an artistic sensibility, an artistic approach to things. It was Pavlovich who approached Palmer on the sidewalk outside the perfumery. She was surprised when Palmer texted her a few days later. "It's Amanda D. Palmer," she wrote, "your new friend." Palmer, an obsessive chronicler of her own life in songs, poems, blog posts, and a memoir, got her start as half of the punk cabaret band, the Dresden Dolls, but she is perhaps more famous for her ability to attract a tight-knit and devoted following wherever she goes. In 2012, she became the first musician to raise more than $1 million on Kickstarter and later became one of Patreon's most successful artists. As Palmer explained in her book, The Art of Asking, part memoir, part manifesto on the virtues of asking for assistance of various kinds, she had built her entire career on, quote, messy exchanges of goodwill and the swapping of favors. Out of this mess, she argues, a utopian sort of community formed. There was no distinction between fans and friends. Over the following, and some of us have that, right? Some of us have that within the communities we've built in our respective YouTube communities or fandoms or what have you, or people who follow us. We have that mixture of friends and fans, and it's always fun. And sometimes the fans become friends, which is always nice, but you always want to treat everybody kind of equally who is treating you well as well. Over the following year and a half, Palmer and Pavlovich occasionally met for a drink or a meal. Palmer offered Pavlovich tickets to her shows and invited her to parties for the Patreon community at her house on nearby Waiheke Island, a lush bohemian retreat with vineyards, golden beaches, and more than 60 helipads to accommodate the billionaires who have vacationed there. Wow. Sometimes Palmer asked Pavlovich for favors, help running errands or organizing files or looking after her child. Pavlovich was happy to assist. So right off the bat, you get the sense that this is an older woman who is seeing a young woman in despair, who is probably fawning all over her, fangirling all over her, and she's going to take advantage of her and use her essentially as free labor under the guise of friendship, under the guise of mentorship. You see this now happening in this article, developing here in this article. Pavlovich was happy to assist. She had a crush on Palmer. She didn't mind that Palmer only occasionally discussed paying her. Where have I heard that before with some people? Even though Pavlovich was always strapped for cash. For Pavlovich, who was estranged from her family and without a safety net, Palmer filled a deeper need. In November of 2020, Palmer invited her to hang out at her place for a weekend with a group of local artists. At the gathering, Palmer asked Pavlovich to babysit while she got a massage. So we're developing. So what you're seeing here is that Palmer is developing this relationship with Pavlovich, this young girl Pavlovich, and she is slowly but surely bringing her into the circles of her life, right? Run a few errands for me, help me out in this way. Go and pick up a dry cleaning, go and do this, and here, come see the concerts for free, come watch the stuff, help me out with my Patreon community, get to know some of the people in the Patreon community. Now I'm going to ask you to babysit my children. What? So now she's gone to this level of babysitting her children. So early the next morning, Pavlovich wrote a diary entry, and it isn't a big babysit, right? She's like, will you babysit them while I get a massage? So it's just like a trial run, right? Getting you used to the idea. This is how predators sometimes slowly but surely bring you into their world as they take their time grooming you to move into this situation. At least that's what I'm getting here from Palmer's approach to things. Early the next morning, Pavlovich wrote a diary entry about the easy intimacy she'd felt in Palmer's sun-drenched home, where she'd read to Palmer's son, who was 5 at the time, their limbs entwined. Quote, the years absent of touch build up like a gray inheritance, she wrote. I'm hungry. I am so fucking famished. So that's what she filled, this need that Pavlovich was away from her family, and so getting brought into the family of someone who she supremely admires now fills this need, this hole within her that is gaping and that is missing the touch of people who care about her. On February 1st of 2022, Palmer texted Pavlovich. So this has been going on for a few years now, this connection, this relationship, right? On February 1st of 2022, Palmer texted Pavlovich and asked if she wanted to spend the weekend babysitting, which would mean bouncing back and forth between her house and her husband's. Here we go. Pavlovich had never met Palmer's husband, from whom she was separated, though of course she knew who he was, Neil Gaiman, the acclaimed British fantasist and author of nearly 50 books, including American Gods and Coraline, and the comic book series, The Sandman. Now, full disclosure, I'm a massive fan of The Sandman. I loved reading those books. Michael Vogel of the Geek Buddies turned me on to those books, and I have reread them over and over and over again. The stories, they're very akin to Hellblazer. Hellblazer even shows up in some of the stories there for Neil Gaiman. And then seeing, of course, the Netflix series, which I thought was a really fantastic interpretation of that. And the second season is around the corner from coming up. So this is an interesting time for this stuff to come out, with that second season still about to come out. I know a lot of people liked American Gods, reading it, and liked American Gods, the series. Coraline, a film that I know my old co-host on the Top 10 show loved, Matt Nost. He loved Coraline. And certainly a lot of people love Coraline. And so there's a lot of things that Neil Gaiman has written over the years that people gravitate to and have enjoyed. But he said, whose work has sold more than 50 million copies worldwide. Gaiman and Palmer had arrived in New Zealand in March of 2020. So this is 2 years before. But just weeks later in 2020, their 9-year marriage collapsed. Gaiman skipped town, breaking COVID protocols to fly to his home on the Isle of Skye. So already you have this sense of privilege from Gaiman that he's breaking protocols to go to his home. Now, he'd returned and was now in 2022, he'd returned and was living in a house near Palmer's on Waiheke. Their previous nanny had recently left and they needed help. Pavlovich agreed and was pleased when Palmer offered to pay her for the weekend's work. So finally, she's getting a little bit of money here. But of course, not giving you any money and then giving you some money makes it seem like that money is so incredible, when really she probably should have been paying you for all this time. Around 4 p.m. on February 4th, Pavlovich took the ferry from Auckland to Waiheke, then sat on a bus and walked through the woods until she arrived at Gaiman's house. an asymmetrical A-frame of dark, burnished wood with picture windows overlooking the sea. Palmer had arranged a play date for the child not so long after Pavlovich arrived. She found herself alone in the house with the author. For a little while, Gaiman worked in his office while she read on the couch. Then he emerged and offered her a tour of the grounds. Isn't enough? A striking figure at 61. 61! His wild black curls threaded with strands of silver. The author picked a fig, her favorite fruit, and handed it to her. Around 8 p.m., they sat down for pizza. Gaiman poured Pavlovich a glass of rosé and then another. He drank only water. They made awkward conversation about New Zealand, about COVID. Pavlovich had never read any of his work, but she was anxious to make a good impression. Now, stop here. He is giving her more and more alcohol. He is making her a little inebriated. Maybe a situation where she can question her judgment, right? He is just drinking water. Interesting. After she cleaned up their plates, after she cleaned up their plates, Gaiman noted that there was still time before they would have to pick up his son from the play date. I've had a thought, she recalls him saying. Why don't you have a bath in the beautiful claw bathtub in the garden? It's absolutely enchanting. So he gets her a little inebriated, gets her drinking rosé. I don't know how much. Obviously, I don't know her tolerance. Maybe she's drunk, maybe she isn't, but it seems like that's his intention, to get her a little inebriated, a little loose. And then he suggests randomly, well, I've had a thought. Why don't you go take off all your clothes and get in this bathtub, even though it's the first day you've met me. We've never expressed interest with each other, but it's okay for me to ask you to take all your clothes off and go take a bath in this beautiful claw bathtub in my garden. Pavlovich told Gaiman that she was fine as she was, but she ultimately agreed. He needed to make a work call, he said, and didn't want Pavlovich to be bored. Seems like an odd, just give her a book. Why would you need her to take off her clothes and get in the bath? Gaiman led Pavlovich down a stone path into the garden to an old-fashioned tub with a roll top and walked away. She got undressed and sank into the bath, looking up at the furry magenta blossoms of the Puhatukawa tree. I don't know how to say that, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. Overhead. A few minutes later, she was surprised to hear Gaiman's footsteps on the stones in the dark. Pohutukawa. I'm going to say that. Pohutukawa. So I'm going to say that. She got undressed and sank into the bath, looking up at the furry magenta blossoms of the Pohutukawa tree overhead. A few minutes later, she was surprised to hear Gaiman's footsteps on the stones in the dark. She tried to cover her breasts with her arms. When he arrived at the bath, she saw that he was naked. Wow. Gaiman put out a couple of citronella candles, I don't know what those are, lit them and got into the bath. He stretched out, facing her, and for a few minutes made small talk. He bitched about Palmer's schedule. He talked about his kid's school. Then he told her to stretch her legs out and, quote, get comfortable. She recalls saying, I said, I'm not confident with my body. He said, it's okay. It's only me. Just relax. Just have a chat. She didn't move. He looked at her again and said, don't ruin the moment. She did as instructed, and he began to stroke her feet. At that point, she recalls she felt a, quote, a subtle terror. Gaiman asked her to sit on his lap. Pavlovich stammered out a few sentences. She was gay. She'd never had sex. She had been sexually abused by a 45-year-old man when she was 15. This may be why she left home when she was 15. Gaiman continued to press. The next part is really amorphous, Pavlovich tells me. That's the writer of the article. But I can tell you that he put his finger straight into my ass and tried to put his penis in my ass, and I said, no. Then he tried to rub his penis between my breasts, and I said, no as well. Then he asked if he could finish on my face, and I said, no, but he did anyway. He said, call me master, and I'll come. He said, be a good girl. You're a good little girl. Afterward, Pavlovich crouched down in the water and tried to clean herself off. Gaiman looked at her and smiled. Amanda told me I couldn't have you, Pavlovich recalls him saying. As soon as he'd heard this, he, quote, knew he had to have her. God, he continued, I wish it were the old days. I wish it were the good old days where we could both have sex with you. This is Palmer here. This is, as you see the picture here, this is Amanda Palmer, of course, drawing attention to herself. Unshaven armpits, hippie, bohemian type of approach. You see Neil Gaiman and his approach here. So this is the couple that we're talking about. For those of you who may not know what Neil Gaiman looks like here, but that is his estranged wife there, drawing attention to herself on the red carpet. So some of you may be saying, why didn't you jump out of there? Why didn't you run? Why did she get in the bath? Why did she put herself in this position? And you're looking at it all wrong when you see it that way. And the thing is, she's a young girl. She clearly comes from a broken home. She's developed this mentor-mentee relationship with Amanda Palmer. And by extension, because she trusts Amanda Palmer and has developed a friendship with Amanda Palmer, and Amanda Palmer relies on her, she, by extension now, extends that out to Neil Gaiman, whose work she admires and knows. And, he sold all these books. So there is a bit of extension of respect given. But it's also the situation of, what am I going to do here? Because if I upset him, will that ruin my relationship with Amanda? How do I tell Amanda that this man did this? And so, and you're young. And the thing is, when you're young and an older person has you in a situation like this, sometimes it can be quite difficult to get out of it, quite difficult to navigate out of it. And when you throw in all the stuff that's around, all the X factors involved in this, it can be quite a lot for a young woman to overcome and fight, especially when she's struggling for money. She's probably barely affording her rent, and she needs any money she can get in order to stay alive. So if you want to judge, I suppose you can judge, but I think you have to put everything into the mix here. But the real problem is a 61-year-old man inviting a young woman to take off her clothes and take a bath in his house, and then him showing up completely naked to get into the bath and starts to tell her to stretch her feet out, to get comfortable, to not ruin the moment, rubs her feet, then forces himself on her to get on top of her, and he does his business and tells her to call him master. And then says the reason he did it was because his ex-wife said he couldn't do it, and that he dehumanizing her even more, turning her into an object even more, and then says, I wish it was the old days, the good old days rather, when they both, him and Amanda, could have sex with her. So clearly, and that's their business. That's, I'm not here to kink shame. Whatever you want to do is your business, right? As long as it's all consensual. This is clearly not, as from Pavlovich's point of view, this is not consensual. I'm taking another sip here. In the Sandman, the DC comic book series that ran from 1989 to 1996 and made Gaiman famous here. Oh, should I make this a little bit bigger? Yeah, here we go. No, actually, I like this better. I like this better. All right. So he tells a story about a writer named Richard Maddock. I remember this story. I think they did this story didn't they, in the Netflix series? I can't remember. After Maddock's first book, he approves. Yes, they did. I remember that because he trapped one of the muses. That's right. After Maddock's first book, or Maddock, whatever you want to say, I'm going to say Maddock. After Maddock's first book proves a success, he sits down to write his second and finds that he can't come up with a single decent idea. This difficulty recedes after he accepts an unusual gift from an older author, a naked woman of a kind who has been kept locked in a room in his house for 60 years. She is Calliope, the youngest of the 9 muses. Maddock rapes her again and again, and his career blossoms in the most extraordinary way. A stylish young beauty tells him how much she loved his characterization of a strong female character, prompting him to remark, actually, I do tend to regard myself as a feminist writer. His downfall comes only when the titular hero, the Sandman, also known as the Prince of Stories, frees Calliope from bondage, a being of boundless charisma and creativity. The Sandman rules the dreaming, the realm we visit in our sleep, where, quote, stories are spun. Older and more powerful than the most powerful gods, he can reward us with exquisite delights or punish us with unending nightmares, depending on what he feels that we deserve. To punish the rapist, the Sandman floods Maddock's mind with such a wild torrent of ideas that he's powerless to write them down, let alone profit them. So, when I read this story, I thought that Neil Gaiman was Dream, right? Throughout all the sequences, it's an extension of him, and he is passing judgment on all these people, and he's exposing the depravity of human beings, the depravity of artists, the depravity of all those things. And now when you look at these allegations and you look at the way this article is laying it out, he's actually Richard Maddock. He is actually these depraved individuals doing these terrible things in order to be able to be successful in art. So in some really, really messed up, fucked up way, he is in essence confessing to his crimes through an artistic approach in writing his stories. And that's mind-blowing. There's an arrogance to that is absolutely stunning. As allegations of Gaiman's sexual misconduct emerged this past summer, some observers noticed Gaiman and Maddock have certain things in common. Like Maddock, Gaiman has called himself a feminist. Like Maddock, Gaiman has racked up major awards. For Gaiman, it's awards in science fiction and fantasy, as well as dozens of prizes for contemporary novels, short stories, poetry, television, and film, helping make him, according to several sources, a millionaire many times over. And like Maddock, Gaiman has come to be seen as a figure who transcended and transformed the genres in which he wrote. First comics, then fantasy and children's literature. But for most of his career, readers identified him not with the rapist, who shows up in a single issue, but with the Sandman, the inexhaustible fountain of story. Yes, I have done that. I did that. One of Gaiman's greatest gifts as a storyteller was his voice, a warm and gentle instrument that he tuned through elocution lessons as a boy in East Grinstead, 30 miles south of London. In America, people mistakenly assumed he was an English gentleman. He spoke very slowly in a hypnotic way, says one of his former students at the fantasy writing workshop Clarion. He wrote that way, too, with rhythm and restraint, lulling you into a trance in the way that a bard might have done with a lyre. Another gift was his memory. He has, quote, libraries full of books memorized, one of his old friends tells me, that's the author, noting that he could recall the page numbers of his favorite passages and recite them verbatim. His vast collection was eclectic enough to encompass both a box of comics, Spider-Man Silver Surfer, from his boyhood, and the works of Oscar Wilde he received as a gift for his bar mitzvah. For the Sandman, a forgotten DC property he had been hired to dust off and polish up, Gaiman gave the hero a makeover, replacing his green suit, fedora, and gas mask with the leather armor of an angsty goth, and surrounded him with characters drawn from the books he could pull off the shelves in his head. From timeless icons like Shakespeare and Lucifer to the obscure San Francisco eccentric Joshua Abraham Norton, Norman Mailer called it, quote, a comic strip for intellectuals. I wouldn't deny that. That's why Sandman appealed to me so much. It's an intellectual approach to telling these kinds of stories in a comic book format, in essence. Gaiman and the Sandman shared a penchant for dressing in black, a shock of unruly black hair, and an erotic power seldom possessed by the authors of comics and fantasy novels. A descendant of Polish Jewish immigrants, Gaiman had gotten his start in the 80s as a journalist for Hire London, covering Duran Duran, Lou Reed, and other brooding lords of rock. And in the world of comic conventions, he was the closest thing there was to that archetype. Now, here we go. Women would turn up to his sightings dressed in the elaborate Victorian goth attire of his characters and beg him to sign their breasts or slip him key cards to their hotel rooms. Whew. One writer recounts running into Gaiman at a World Fantasy Convention in 2011. His assistant wasn't around, and he was late to a reading. Quote, I can't get to it if I walk by myself, he told her. And as they made their way through the convention side by side, the whole floor full of people tilted and slid toward him, she says. They wanted to be entwined with him in ways I was not prepared to defend him against. A woman fell to her knees and wept. What do I tell you guys all the time on the hot mic? Cut out the hero worship. Cut it out. These people are not as amazing as you think they are in real life. Yes, they can create stuff, but a lot of them are super fucking depraved and uncomfortable ways. And so, you know, sadly, a lot of people, because they are messed up, because they have issues, because they have situations going on in their lives, gravitate to these authors, gravitate to this content that they make, and they make it their lives. And that's always a difficult thing, especially when they're young, because they're much more easily available to be manipulated, unfortunately, because we're not as mature yet. People who flock to fantasy conventions and signings make up a quote, inherently vulnerable community, one of Gaiman's former friends, a fantasy writer, tells the author. They, quote, wrap themselves around a beloved text so it becomes their self-identity, as I said. They want to share their souls with the creators of these works. And if you have morality around it, you say no, unquote. It was an open secret in the late 90s and early aughts among convention goers that Gaiman cheated on his first wife, Mary McGrath, a private Midwestern Scientologist he'd married in his early 20s. But in my conversations with Gaiman's old friends, collaborators, and peers, nearly all of them told me that they never imagined that Gaiman's affairs could have been anything but enthusiastically consensual. As one prominent editor in the field puts it, quote, the one thing I hear again and again, largely from women, is, quote, he was always nice to me. He was always a gentleman. The writer Kelly Link, who met Gaiman at a reading in 1997, recalls finding him charmingly goofy. He was hapless in a way that was kind of exasperating, she says, but also made him seem very harmless. Someone who had a sexual relationship with Gaiman in the aughts recalls him flipping through questions fans wrote on cards at a Q&A session. Once a fan asked if she could be, quote, his sex slave, he read it aloud and said, well, no, he'd be very demure. So this is the thing, too, to look at. Like, he has an act. This is his act, right? Oh, I can't possibly find this room without help from this young woman. Please help me so you can fawn all over me and get me there and walk me through the convention so all these women and all these dudes give me love and fall all over me and tell me how great I am, right? What's the other thing? Oh, he was charmingly goofy, what Kelly Link says. Charmingly goofy, right. That's all an act. He was hapless. Oh, what do they got? Weaponized incompetence is the word that I've heard, or the phrase I've heard recently. And that's essentially what he's doing, right? Oh, well, I couldn't possibly. But it's all an act. And he probably, not to excuse him, but it's so second nature to him, it doesn't feel like it's wrong, I would imagine. Even though it is. But there were some who saw another side of the author. One woman, Brenda, a pseudonym, met Gaiman in the 90s at a signing for the Sandman, where she was working. On signing lines, Gaiman had a knack for connecting with each individual. Now, signing lines, you know that, when you go to a bookstore, you go to a convention, you stand in line, you got a copy of the book, you want him to sign it. Apparently, he would ask questions, laugh, and assure them that their inability to form sentences was fine. So it seems like he was very understanding, very cool with the fandom and all of that. After the Sandman signing, at a dinner attended by those who had worked the event, Gaiman sat next to Brenda. Quote, everyone wanted to be near him, but he was laser focused on me, she says. A few years later, Brenda traveled to Chicago to attend the World Horror Convention, where Gaiman received the top prize for American Gods, the book that cemented him as a best-selling novelist. The night after the awards ceremony, she and Gaiman ended up in bed together. As soon as they began to hook up, the feeling that had drawn her to him, the magical spell of his interest in her individuality, vanished. He seemed to have a script, she tells the author. He wanted me to call him master immediately. He demanded that she promise him her soul. It was like he'd gone into this ritual that had nothing to do with me. I mean, this twice now we've heard stories where he is taking advantage or he is having sexual relations with a young woman and wanting her to call him master. There is some very weird sickness to that approach to things and a weird kind of desire to control, to possess, to enslave, even if you make someone call you master. If you're rich and you're successful and you're beloved, why do you need to do these kinds of things? And of course, his friends all say, well, I'm surprised that these weren't consensual affairs. You know why? Well, because the ones that were consensual, those were easy for him. There's no challenge to that. The ones he wants to go and get, that's the challenge. That's what he wants. He wants to take what he can't have because he can have whatever he wants when he wants it. Some people are really messed up like that. Well, if it's too easy to get, there's no worth to it. But if I have to force it or make it happen or take it, then there's something that I can get. Or if I have to convince them to give it up, it's very interesting. Well, I don't mean interesting in a good way either. Mindset. This past July, a British podcast produced by Tortoise Media broke the news that 2 women had accused Gaiman of sexual assault. Since then, more women have shared allegations of assault, coercion, and abuse. The podcast Master, which I have not listened to and I'm going to listen to now over the next couple of days, reported by Paul Caruana Galicia and Rachel Johnson, tells the stories of 5 of these women. Gaiman's perspective on these relationships, including with Pavlovich, is that they were entirely consensual. Yes, I'll read his comments from today after we're done with this. I spoke with 4 of the author spoke with 4 of these women along with 4 others whose stories share elements with theirs. So eight women. She also reviewed contemporaneous diary entries, texts, and emails with friends, messages between Gaiman and the women, and police correspondence. Most of the women were in their 20s when they met Gaiman. The youngest was 18. 2 of them worked for him. 5 were his fans. with one exception, an allegation of forcible kissing from 1986 when Gaiman was in his mid-20s. The stories take place when Gaiman was in his 40s or older, a period in which he lived among the US, the UK, and New Zealand. By then, he had a reputation as an outspoken champion of women. Tara Prescott Johnson wrote, Gaiman insists on telling the stories of people who are traditionally marginalized, missing, or silenced in literature. She wrote this in the essay collection Feminism in the Worlds of Neil Gaiman. Although his books abounded with stories of men torturing, raping, and murdering women, and this is true if you've read his stuff, this was largely perceived as evidence of his empathy. Catherine Kendall was 22 when she met Gaiman in 2012. She was volunteering at one of his events in Asheville, North Carolina, a city that I have a couple of friends in. Beautiful city from what I hear. He invited her to join him a few days later at an after party for another event, where he kissed her. The two struck up a flirtatious correspondence, emailing and Skyping in the middle of the night. Kendall did not want to have sex with Gaiman, and on one of their calls, she told him this. Afterwards, she recorded his reply in her diary. Quote, he had no designs on me beyond flirty friendship, and I believe him thoroughly. She'd grown up listening to his audiobooks. She later told Papillon de Boer, the host of the podcast, Am I Broken? Quote, and then that same voice that told me those beautiful stories when I was a kid was telling me the story that I was safe and that we were just friends and that he wasn't a threat. At a reading 10 months later, Gaiman suggested that Kendall and two other girls wait for him on his tour bus so that they could all hang out after he was done signing. That's the trap being laid. When Gaiman showed up, he pulled Kendall into the back of the bus and he lay on top of her. He kept saying, kiss me like you mean it, Kendall remembered. She tried to get into it, but she was panicked. Eventually, Gaiman rolled off her. I'm a very wealthy man, she remembers him saying, and I'm used to getting what I want. Years later, Gaiman gave Kendall $60,000 to pay for therapy in an attempt, as he put it in a recorded phone call, to make up some of the damage. And that's a picture of Kendra Stout there from 2007 with Gaiman. Gaiman had been having sexual encounters with the younger fans for a long time. Kendra Scott, that's who we see here. Kendra Scott, let's get into this. Oh, Kendra Stout, rather. Kendra Stout is who we see here in this picture. Kendra Stout was 18 when, in 2003, she drove 4.5 hours to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to see Gaiman read from Endless Nights, a follow-up to The Sandman. She met him in the signing line. Gaiman sent her long emails and bought her a web camera so they could chat on video. Around 3 years after they met, he flew to Orlando to take her on a date. 21 years old. He invited her back to his hotel room, put on a playlist of love songs, and then held her down with one hand. Gaiman didn't believe in foreplay or lubrication, Stout tells me, which could make sex particularly painful. When she said it hurt too much, he'd tell her the problem was she wasn't submissive enough. He talked at length about the dominant and submissive relationship he wanted out of me, she tells me. Stout had no prior interest, she tells the author rather. Stout had no prior interest in BDSM. She says Gaiman never asked what she liked in bed, and there was no discussion of safe words or aftercare or limits. He'd ask her to call him master, here we go again, and beat her with his belt. Jesus Christ. These were not sexy little taps, she says. When she told him she didn't like it, she says he replied, it's the only way I can get off. Oh, my God. There's a sickness in that. Because clearly he's getting more and more brazen, bolder and bolder. So it's not just enough to take now. Now he wants to hurt or damage or spank or whip the person who is doing this. So who he's subjecting to his sexual desires, and clearly not consensually. So Gaiman told Stout he had been introduced to these practices by a woman he'd met in his early 20s who had asked him to, quote, whip her P-word. At the time, he claimed to Stout he was such a naive Englishman that he thought she meant her cat. Then she handed him a flogger and told him to use it on her vagina. This is what gets me off now, Stout recalls him saying. Similar anecdote shows up in an interview Gaiman gave for a 2022 biography of Kathy Acker, the late experimental punk writer Gaiman befriended in his 20s. But he offers a different account about how it affected him. When Acker asked him to whip her vagina, he found it profoundly unsexual. He told the interviewer, I did it and ran away. He identified himself as very vanilla. Right. Of course. He's not going to say it out loud. He's not going to admit it, right? So the way he plays it off once again, oh, I wouldn't do that. Oh, it scared me. I ran away. I'm so boring. I'm so boring. Oh God, I'm so boring. That's what lures you in. That's what lures you in. It lures people in because they go, "Oh no, you're not let's try things." That's what lures it in. In 2007, Gaiman and Stout took a trip to the Cornish countryside. On their last night there, Stout developed a UTI that had gotten so bad she couldn't sit down. So they were clearly still interacting with each other. She told Gaiman they could fool around, but that any penetration would be too painful to bear. It was a big, hard no, she says. I told him, you cannot put anything in my vagina or I will die. Gaiman flipped her over on the bed, she says, and attempted to penetrate her with his fingers. She told him no. He stopped for a moment, and then he penetrated her with his penis. At that point, she tells me, I just shut down. She lay on the bed until he was finished. This past October, she filed a police report alleging he raped her. According to the podcast, well, let me get some more here. Sorry, guys. Oh, my nose is getting stuffed up too. According to the podcast, which quoted Gaiman through his representatives, his position was that, quote, sexual degradation, bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism may not be to everyone's tastes, but between consenting adults, BDSM is lawful. Now, Gaiman declined to speak with the author despite multiple requests, but through a legal representative, he responded to some claims. If you know anything about BDSM, Gaiman's claim that he was engaging in it with these women may sound plausible, at least in some cases. The kind of domineering violence he inflicted on them is common among people who practice BDSM, and all of the women at some point played along, calling him their master, texting him afterward that they needed him, even writing that they loved him and missed him. But there is a crucial difference between BDSM and what Gaiman was doing. An acronym for bondage and discipline, dominance and submission and sadism and masochism, BDSM is a culture with a set of long-standing norms, the most important of which is that all parties must eagerly and clearly consent to the overall dynamic as well as to each act before they engage in it. This, as many practitioners, including sex educators like Dossie Easton and Janet W. Hardy, who wrote some of the defining texts of the subculture, have stressed over decades, is the defining line that separates BDSM from abuse. And it was a line that Gaiman, according to the women, did not respect. Two of the women who have never spoken to each other compared him to an angler fish, the deep-sea predator that uses a bulb of bioluminescence to lure prey into its jaws. Instead of a light one, says he would dangle a floppy-haired, soft-spoken British guy. Right. So here's a picture of the bathtub from earlier with Miss Pavlovich. This is the bathtub in the garden that she was asked to get in. Look at it. It's wide open. It's wide open. And this is her after the next morning. This is Miss Pavlovich the next morning. She took a picture of herself. After Gaiman got into bathtub with Pavlovich, so we're back here, she retreated to Palmer's house, which was vacant at the time. She sat in the shower for an hour crying, then got into Palmer's bed and began to search the internet for clues that might explain what had happened to her. She Googled Me Too and Neil Gaiman. Nothing. The only negative stories she found were about how he'd broken COVID lockdown rules in 2020 and had been forced to apologize to the people of the Isle of Skye for endangering their lives. At the end of the weekend, Palmer texted Pavlovich to say how pleased she was to see Pavlovich and her child get along. The universe is a karmic mystery, Palmer wrote. We nourish each other in the most random and unpredictable ways. Palmer asked if she could babysit again. She needed so much help. Would Pavlovich consider staying with them for the foreseeable future? Now, you have to ask yourself, how much did Amanda know that Neil was doing? Was this a setup? Is this a game? Are they both twisted people who play this game with young, unassuming women or women with low self-esteem or women from broken houses, young women that they manipulate and play this game with each other? Some people in power, especially those that can get a lot of money and those who are out there in the weird-ass bohemian side of things, they can absolutely dehumanize people all the time and treat them as playthings. They're fucked up people in the head, man. Would Pavlovich consider staying with him for the foreseeable future? Pavlovich was living in a sublet that was about to end. She was broke and hadn't been able to find a new apartment. She'd been homeless at the start of the pandemic when the perfumery closed and had ended up crashing on the beach in a friend's sleeping bag on and off for the first 2 weeks of lockdown. The thought of returning to the beach filled her with dread. Right, she was out of options. She didn't consider reaching out to her own family. Her parents had divorced when she was 3, and Pavlovich had grown up splitting time between their households. Violence, Pavlovich tells me, was normalized in the household, tells the author rather, was normalized in the household. One close family member beat her with a belt. Another would strangle Pavlovich when she got upset and slap her across the face until her cheeks were raw. Jesus, people are so cruel. She began to regularly cut her arms and wrists with a knife when she was 11. She became bulimic, then anorexic. By 13, Pavlovich had grown so thin that she ended up in a psychiatric unit at Auckland Children's Hospital and spent weeks on a feeding tube. When she was 15, she left home and never went back. In the years since, she had been looking for a new family, but many of the people she'd encountered in that search turned out to be abusive as well. After all of this, Amanda Palmer was an actual creature sent from a celestial realm. It was like hallelujah, Pavlovich tells the author. Palmer was famous for speaking out about sexual abuse and encouraging others to do the same. In songs and essays, she had written of having been sexually assaulted and raped on multiple occasions as a teenager and young woman. Pavlovich didn't think someone like that could be married to someone who would assault women. Sexual abuse is one of the most confusing forms of violence that a person can experience. The majority of people who have endured it do not immediately recognize it as such. Some never do. You're not thinking in a linear or logical fashion, Pavlovich says, but the mind is trying to process it in the ways that it can. Whatever had happened in the bath, she'd been through worse and survived, she thought, and Gaiman and Palmer were offering her the possibility of a shared future. Palmer's vision of herself as the central figure of a utopian community could, according to some of her friends, make her careless with the young, impressionable women she invited into her and her husband's lives. Her idealism could blind her to reality, one friend says. Idealism, yeah. Palmer told Pavlovich they might travel to London together and to Scotland, where Gaiman was shooting the second season of Good Omens. Pavlovich had wanted to leave New Zealand, her, quote, epicenter of trauma, for as long as she could remember. These conversations filled her head with fantasies of, quote, finally being on solid ground in the world. After Palmer's offer, Pavlovich texted Gaiman, I am consumed by thoughts of you, the things you will do to me. I'm so hungry. What a terrible creature you've turned me into. The following weekend, she packed up her sublet and boarded the ferry to Waiheke. Throughout his career, Gaiman has written about terror from the point of view of the child. His most recent novel, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, tells the story of a quiet and bookish 7-year-old boy. Through various unfortunate events, he ends up with a hole in his heart that can never be healed. A doorway through which nightmares from distant realms enter our world. Over the course of the tale, the boy suffers terribly, sometimes at the hands of his own family. At dinner one night, the boy refuses to eat the food his nanny has prepared. The nanny, the boy knows, isn't really a human, but a nightmare creature from another world. When his father demands to know why he won't eat, the boy explains she's a monster. His father becomes enraged. To punish him, he fills the tub, then picks up the child, plunges him into the bath, and pushes his shoulders and head beneath the chilly water. I had read many books in that bath, the boy said. It was one of my safe places, and now I had no doubt I was going to die there. Later that night, the boy runs away from home. On his way out, he glimpses his father having sex with a monstrous nanny through the drawing room window. Oof. In various interviews over the years, Gaiman has called The Ocean at the End of the Lane his most personal book. While much of it is fantastical, Gaiman has said that the kid is me. Or maybe you're the dad, buddy. The book is set in Sussex, where Gaiman grew up. In the story, the narrator survives otherworldly evil with the help of a family of magical women. As a child, Gaiman had no such friends to call on. I was going back to the 7-year-old me and giving myself a peculiar kind of love that I didn't have, he told an interview in 2017. I never feel the past is dead or young. Neil isn't around anymore. He's still there, hiding in a library somewhere, looking for a doorway that will lead him to somewhere safe where everything works. While Gaiman has identified the boy in the book as himself, he has also claimed that none of the things that happened to the boy happened to him. Yet there is reason to believe that some of the most horrifying events of the novel did occur. Gaiman has rarely spoken about a core fact of his childhood. In 1965, when Neil was 5 years old, his parents, David and Sheila, left their jobs as a business executive and a pharmacist and bought a house in East Grinstead, a mile away from what was at the time the worldwide headquarters for the Church and Scientology. Oh boy. Its founder, the former science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard, lived down the road from there from 1965 until 1967, when he fled the country and began directing the church from international waters, pursued by the CIA, FBI, and a handful of foreign governments and maritime agencies. It's amazing how Scientology is totally respected now. David and Sheila were among England's earliest adherents to Scientology. They began studying Dianetics in 1956 and eventually took positions in the Guardian's office, a special department of the organization dedicated to handling the church's growing number of legal cases, public communications, and intelligence operations. The mission of this office, as Hubbard wrote, was its covert use in destroying the repute of individuals and groups. On the side, the Gaimans ran the church's canteen, lodged foreign Scientologists in their home, and opened a vitamin company in town where they supplied courses of supplements for Scientology's detoxification programs. a business that grew exponentially alongside the expansion of the church. By the late 1960s, David was the church's public face and chief spokesperson in the UK. It was a challenging job to say the least. The UK following example. I don't know if I want to read all of this stuff from Scientology, but I guess I kind of want to go back. David used deals. Okay, I guess fine. Okay. It was a challenging job to say the least. I don't have a lot of time left, so I want to make sure I get through this. The UK, following the example of a handful of other governments, had issued a report declaring Scientology's methods a serious danger to the health of those who submit to them. Hubbard would routinely punish members of the organization who committed in minor infractions by binding them, blindfolding them, and throwing them overboard into icy waters. Wow. Back in England, David gave interviews to the press to smooth over such troubling accounts. The church was under particular pressure to assure the public it was not harming children. In his bulletins to members, Hubbard had made it clear that children were not to be exempt from the punishments to which adults were subjected. So here we see this teaching that it's all equal and that violence and that horrible punishment is okay in response to a violation or a perceived violation or a power dynamic. If a child laughed inappropriately or failed to remember a Scientology term, they could be sent to the ship's hold and made to chip rust for days or confined in a chain locker for weeks at a time without blankets or a bathroom. In his book, Going Clear, Lawrence Wright recounts the story of a 4-year-old boy named Derek Green, an adopted black child who stole a Rolex and dropped it overboard. He was confined to the locker for 2 days and 2 nights. When his mother pleaded with Hubbard to let him out, he reminded her of the Scientology axiom that children are actually adults in small bodies and equally responsible for their behavior. A representative for the Church of Scientology said it does not speak about members past or present, but denies this event occurred. Of course they do. David used Neil as an exhibit in his case to the public. In 1968, he arranged for Neil to give an interview to the BBC. When the reporter asked the child if Scientology made him, quote, a better boy, Neil replied, not exactly that, but when you make a release, you feel absolutely great. A release in Scientology lingo is what happens when you complete one of the lower levels of coursework. What was happening away from the cameras is difficult to know, in part because Gaiman has avoided talking about it, changing the subject whenever an interviewer or a friend brings it up. But it seems unlikely that he would have been spared the disciplinary measures inflicted on adults and children as a standard practice at that time. According to someone who knew the Gaimans, David and Sheila did apply Scientology's methods at home. When Neil was around the age of the child in the ocean at the end of the lane, the person said David took him up to the bathtub, ran a cold bath, and drowned him to the point where Neil was screaming for air. Jesus. As a teenager, Neil worked for the Church of Scientology for 3 years as an auditor, a minister of the church who conducts a process some have likened to hypnosis. One former member of the church who worked with Gaiman's parents and was audited by Gaiman recalls him as precocious and ambitious. It was unusual for a teenager to have completed such a high level of training, he tells me, but the Gaimans were like royalty, he says. In 1981, David was promoted to lead the Guardian's office, making him one of the most powerful people in the church. But the same year, he fell from grace. A new generation of Scientologists, led by David Miscavige, who eventually succeeded Hubbard as the church leader, but had Hubbard's ear, and David was, quote, caught in that grinder, as his former colleague puts it. A document declaring David a suppressive person was released a few years later. It accused him of a range of offenses, including sexual misconduct. David, the document claims, put on a front of being mild-mannered and quite sociable, adding that his actions belie this. His greatest offense, it seemed, was hubris. Gaiman required others to look up to him instead of to source, it reads, referring to Hubbard. In the 80s, David was sent off to a sort of rehabilitation camp. It was around the time that Gaiman set out to make a living as a writer. Charming and strategic, he used the context he developed as a journalist to break into the business of genre writing, endearing himself to the giants of the time, Douglas Adams, Arthur C. Clarke, Clive Barker, Terry Pratchett, Alan Moore. When I was young, I had unbelievable chutzpah, Gaiman says in his documentary, the kind of monstrous self-certainty that you only get normally in people who then go on to conquer half the civilized world. Woo! All right, so we get into their relationship, how they wed, all these things, how they lived, him and Palmer. In 2012, Palmer met a 20-year-old fan who was asked to be referred to as Rachel at a Dresden Dolls concert. After one of Palmer's next shows, the women had sex. The morning after, Palmer snapped a few semi-naked pictures of Rachel and asked if she could send one to Gaiman. So here we go. She and Palmer slept together a few more times, but then Palmer seemed to lose interest in sex with her. Some 6 months after they met, Palmer introduced Rachel to Gaiman online, telling Rachel he'll love you. The two struck up a correspondence that quickly turned sexual, and Gaiman invited her to his house in Wisconsin. As she packed for the trip, she asked Palmer over email if she had any advice for pleasing Gaiman in bed. Palmer joked in response, I think the fun is finding out on your own. Oof. With Gaiman, Rachel says there was never, quote, a blatant rupture of consent, but that he was always pressing her to do things that hurt and scared her. Looking back, she feels Palmer gave her to him like a toy. Oof. In 2014, the cracks in Gaiman and Palmer's marriage began to show to those around them. While they were at Bard, they decided to buy a house upstate. Palmer would have preferred to live in New York City, but Gaiman liked the woods. Eventually picked a sprawling estate on 80 acres of Woodstock. Later that year, Palmer got pregnant. She and Gaiman were spending more time at home together, talked about slowing down, devoting a relationship. When she was 8 months pregnant, Gaiman came to her with a problem. He had slept with a fan in her early 20s, taking her virginity. Now Gaiman told her the girl was, quote, going crazy. He promised to change, and they met with a couples counselor. Gaiman was prone to panic attacks and had never been in treatment. Amanda was shocked at how traumatized Neil was given his public persona and the guy she thought she'd married, a person close to himself. So, yeah. There was an audition at lunch one day. Bonus, living in the woods. Sorry, we get into this twisted dark things. The series of sexual over the next 2 years. They had a series. There's always when Palmer was away. So Gaiman now sleeps with this woman, Carolyn Wallner, who was a potter, I guess. And so Palmer said she wished her marriage was more like Wallner and Phillips, but their marriage of 11 years was falling apart. Philip moved out of the house. Wallner spent her days in bed crying and drinking. She stopped eating for the most part, stopped working. It was then that Gaiman began paying attention. Right. He began paying attention to her because she was in a weakened state. She was in a fragile state. She was in a place of low self-esteem, low self-worth. She was feeling bad about her life. So this excited him, the ability to go in and try to control her. You need a hug. She stood and he hugged her, then slid his hands down her pants and into her underwear and squeezed her butt. She does not recall saying or doing anything in response. I was stunned. Over the next 2 years, they had a series of sexual encounters, always when Palmer was away. When Gaiman wasn't around, they occasionally engaged in phone sex. So we had all of this going on. And one of the visits, he found her crying by the fireplace. He walked over to her, stuck his thumb in her mouth, and twisted her nipples. She told Gaiman the arrangement was making her feel bad. She recalls him replying, I don't want you to feel bad, but nothing changed. Wallner had no income at the time and was borrowing money from her sister to get by. Again, another situation where someone is financially dependent. She worried that if she didn't appease Gaiman, he'd kick her out of the house, and then she and her three daughters would have nowhere to go. I like our trade, she remembers him saying. You take care of me, I'll take care of you. So, whew. Oh, and one time, apparently, she got in bed with him. Once Wallner and the boy, then four. Sometimes she would babysit. Once Wallner and the boy, then four fell asleep reading stories in Gaiman and Palmer's bed. Wallner woke up when Gaiman returned home. He got into bed with his son in the middle, then reached across the child to grab Wallner's hand and put it on his penis. She said she jumped out of bed. He didn't have boundaries. I remember thinking that there was something really wrong with him, rather. So, let's see. Gaiman informed Wallner that the land he had promised her in 2021 was no longer available. That summer, she stopped responding to his attempts to engage in phone sex, and Gaiman increased the pressure on her to leave his property. Of course, he wasn't getting what he wanted. One night in December 2020, Gaiman's business manager, Terry Bird, called Wallner and offered her $5,000 to move immediately if she'd signed a 16-page NDA agreeing to never discuss anything about her experience with Gaiman or Palmer, to take legal action against Gaiman. Wallner recalls saying to Bird, what am I going to do with $5,000? I need therapy. This is maybe $300,000. Looking back, she says she didn't know how she came up with that number, but Gaiman agreed to it, and she signed. Gaiman's representatives say Wallner initiated the sexual encounters and denied that he engaged in any sexual activity with her in the presence of his son. 2 months later, Pavlovich arrived on Wahiki. She asked according to Palmer's friends, Palmer asked for a divorce after Rachel called to tell her that she and Gaiman were still having sexual contact, long past the point when Palmer thought their relationship had ended. She was hurt but unsurprised. All right. Bob was in the kitchen time when he approached her from behind. Okay, so here's another. Yeah, pushed her. Here's another thing. He approached her from behind, pulled her to the sofa. It all happened so quickly. He pushed down her pants and began to beat her with his belt. He then attempted to initiate anal sex without lubrication. I screamed no, Pavlovich says. Had Gaiman and Pavlovich been engaging in BDSM, this could conceivably have been part of the rape scene, a scenario sometimes described as consensual non-consent, but that would have required careful negotiation in advance, which she says they had not done. After she said no, Gaiman backed off briefly, went into the kitchen. When he returned, he brought butter to use as a lubricant. Jesus Christ. She continued to scream until Gaiman was finished. When it was over, he called her slave and ordered her to clean him up. She protested, but that it wasn't hygienic, and he said, are you defying your master? And she recalls, I had to lick my own shit. I think I'm done on this one, right? Like, I think we get a good idea of what the fuck is going on here. This is horrific. Absolutely horrific. So he claims, he came out today in the full statement, posted Tuesday. He said, I was emotionally unavailable while being sexually available, self-focused, and not as thoughtful as I could or should have been. But he said, I'm not willing to turn my back on the truth, and I can't accept being described as someone I am not, and cannot and will not admit to doing things I didn't do. So he is claiming that all of these women who have these very specific, detailed allegations that some of them are correlative, some of them are the same allegations over the years are all lying, and he's the one telling the truth. And that is horrific, absolutely horrific. And look, I don't care how mistreated he was, which the author goes into talking about in this article and what have you. It doesn't mean you get to violate people. Doesn't mean you get to abuse them. Doesn't mean you get to sexually assault them. I don't give a fuck. Like, it does not mean that. So although you have a bigger understanding of who he is and how he was probably brought up in a really supremely fucked up environment, and I know that a lot of people feel that way about Scientology. I personally do not know any Scientologists, nor have any contact with any Scientologists that I know of. I've watched the documentaries. I know my feelings about it and the stories I've seen and heard and the horrific things that go on there from the documentaries. But clearly that's not the best way to come out of that situation. But then there are a lot of famous people who are Scientologists. So it's a really weird kind of thing. Like Elizabeth Moss, Tom Cruise. I think Chloe Feynman's a Scientologist. I think. I'm not sure. I'm not, I think. Michael Pena, I think, I've heard rumors he's a Scientologist. So there's all kinds of people who are successful who are Scientologists, right? But then you get stuff like Danny Masterson and the things he pulled and did and the privilege he felt he had in those situations. So this is just a shame, an utter shame. And all of his denials, honestly, it means nothing because these women feels to me very strongly they're telling the truth. And the specificity of the allegations, the way some of those things are exactly the same, even though they've never talked to each other, that's usually the key. That's usually the thing that alerts you to this kind of stuff. And clearly, if this dude can't get therapy if he's not going to admit what he did, right? I mean, you can go into therapy, but if you're not going to own up to what you did, what's the point of doing therapy? And Ewok says, sad that Sony, WME, and the NYT can cower so quickly to the demands of a power couple like Blake and Ryan. I'm glad Baldoni's fighting back with evidence. Oh, let's go back to Baldoni. Thank you, Ewok. I appreciate that, and I agree 100%. But yeah, I mean, and I think J.K. Rowling, who I'm no fan of course, with some of the comments she's made, but listen, she says in response to this article, quote, the literary crowd that had a hell of a lot to say about Harvey Weinstein before he was convicted have been strangely muted in their response to multiple accusations against Neil Gaiman from young women who'd never met, yet as with Weinstein, tell remarkably similar stories. I think she's right to call out the literary community because, again, it's a guy who's powerful. They're all afraid to cross him because then they might not get their book approved. They might not get Neil Gaiman to write a forward for their book. And again, it's another situation where people in need are essentially being submissive to a person who wants to be, in essence, their master, their literary master, And so these are these situations. And I think both him and Palmer deserve an incredible amount of scrutiny and backlash and questioning. And there should be, I hope some of these cases are still within the statute of limitations and we can see more and more of these people come out now that these people have come forward in such a strong way to expose the things that have gone on here, because it is unfortunate to see this happening, especially to an author whose work I have deeply, deeply admired and loved. To find out that this is the genesis of that work is just unfortunate and unsettling and sad and really sad. Who can we believe in anymore? It seems like we can't believe in anybody anymore. Jay Scoot says, you and Snyder did a bit of a top 10 a few weeks ago with DiCaprio flicks. What's the likelihood of more of that? And even with Matt Knows, possibly. Thanks for the stream. Thanks, Jay Scoots. Oh, probably not with Matt. Matt's pretty much retired from the stuff that we do. And I mean, maybe somewhere down the road, but I mean, we haven't talked in a year, Matt and I, so probably not. I mean, like I've told you guys many times, Matt and I were friends doing the show, but we were never friends outside of the show. We never hung out, never went to dinner solo, never went to get beer all the time. Like, we never did any of that stuff. That wasn't our relationship, right? We never went to a movie together or some shit. Like, Matt and I worked within the confines of the podcast. It's what kept it fresh. And when we did live shows, we talked about what we were going to do. and then we went on stage and did it, but then kind of also flew by the seat of our pants. It's what kept everything electric and live and real between us, and it was a lot of fun. But maybe some point down the road, maybe Matt and I with Jeff will do something that would be a lot of fun. But Jeff and I, it's always, if it's a slow news week, when we'll do a top 10. So that's usually the situation there. Whew. All right. Yeah, we're also going to have to, in our own minds, decide how we feel about his stuff. So we will see how you feel about it, because this stuff is very unsettling. It's heartbreaking. It's unfortunate that you see these kinds of things from people, and you see and hear these descriptive allegations and stories. And for those of you who don't know this stuff, like if you haven't finished reading the article, go to the New Yorker or go to Vulture and read the article. It was behind a paywall, but now I think they've put it back out, because I'm not behind a paywall and I was able to look at it and read it. So, and decide for yourself what you feel about these situations. But it's just a shame how much is getting exposed and why people can't just be talented, artistic, smart, strong, capable, and then end up like this, and have all these negative things behind. So Azure Aces says, support and love to you, Rocha. Thanks for streaming. Hail Washington. Let's go. Yeah, let's go. Sunday. Here we go. Or Saturday night. That's right. Let's make it happen. So there it is. All right. So I should probably wrap up there. Thank you all so much for joining me. I've got a meeting at 5:00, so I gotta shut it down here. Thanks for the super chats. Thanks for the one Streamlab. Really appreciate it. 330 of you joining me live. Thank you so much for joining me live here in the afternoon to talk about this stuff. Make sure you hit a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel down below, marching towards 40,000 subscribers. Would love to all of you all come aboard. I'm going to do more of these live shows as I ramp up here, because I'm considering doing an afternoon show or like a drive time show. So I'm just looking at it, considering it and seeing it and trying out this kind of stuff. So I like going live. I'm more natural live than pre-recorded. So that's just the hit I'm going to have to take when I do this stuff. So, but thank you very much for joining me. You guys are amazing. I love you madly. The chat was very, very lively, and I appreciate that as well. Share this on your social media. Let people know about what's going on here on the Outlaw Nation. More stuff going on. We're definitely going to be reviewing Skeleton Crew tomorrow morning with the Geek Buddies. We've got Hot Mike coming out later. We got Jedi Way reviewing Skeleton Crew as well. I may have a out of the theater reaction tonight for Wolfman. I'm going to that screening tonight. So hopefully, if the theater's not too full, then I will stick around and watch it. If it is too full, then I'll just watch it on Thursday or Friday and do my review then. But you guys are amazing. I appreciate you. And let me know what you thought about everything down in the comments section below. The Baldoni drama, Fede Alvarez, and some of the super chat questions, and also this entire article and what it highlights about Neil Gaiman, and where are you on it, and what do you feel about it, and where do you go from here with something like this? Like, how do you bounce back? So, all right, I love you madly. Take care of yourselves. Be well, and I'll talk to you next time. Remember to follow me at The Rocha Says on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. And I'll talk to you next time with another brand new live episode of The Nation here on the Outlaw Nation. Peace until then.